I was chatting on Talkback. Did you get me? Not sure you're getting me on Talkback. Well, welcome along to Snetterton, everybody. Round 5 of the 2023 Focus Cup Championship is just heading off on its final formation lap ahead of what is a busy weekend for all of the Focus Cup Championship drivers, because it's a double-header weekend for them, which means rather than get the usual 2 races over the course of the weekend, they've got 4 to cram in over the course of today and tomorrow as well. So a full grid of cars heading off on their final formation lap around what is the full circuit configuration, the Snetterton 300 we are racing on, so just under 3 miles, 2.96 miles is the full configuration, and the times that were set in qualifying sets this first grid of the weekend. There's also points for qualifying as well, 30 points if you claim pole in qualifying. Let's guide you through the grid then. Lewis Clark lines up on pole position, and alongside him his long-time competitor in this championship, Simon Waugh. Row 2 of the grid is Richard Avis, who is partnered up with Ian Mitchell, who is alongside on row number 2. And as we head on to row number 3, Jonathan Baker, who had an off in testing yesterday, he'll hoping for better fortunes today, lines up alongside Ian Graham, with row 4 being comprised on the inside by Simon Watts. He's already been a race winner so far this season, so from 7th on the grid he's got work to do, and alongside him is Greg Saunders. Onto the 5th row of the grid, the inside of the 5th row of the grid, it is the man that runs the championship, Mr. Focus Cup, Simon Walton. He has got Claire Avis for company. And onto row number 6, that is where we see Mark McCann, and he is partnered up on that 6th row of the grid with Andrew Weiss. And then the final row of the grid sees Sarah Hall and Abby Walton line up on the final row of the grid. So, times set in qualifying. You can see the weather conditions here in Norfolk are absolutely beautiful. Warm, ambient temperatures. So these diesel-powered Ford Focus cars should be working particularly hard on their tyres, one would have thought, on what is going to be a very, very adhesive circuit. Very light winds as well, and as you can see, 19 degrees air temperature, which means track temperature is going to be, at least probably 10 degrees above that. So we'll have to wait and see. Lewis Clark, the man who qualified on pole position, has yet to win a race so far this year. He had 2nd place at Brands Hatch as his best result. That's his only podium finish of the season so far, but he has been consistent. He's finished in the top 5 in each one of the 4 races so far this season, so he leads the championship coming into this weekend on 136 points, and of course has now picked up an extra 30 points for qualifying on pole position. 26 if you're 2nd, 23rd if you're 3rd. Those are the points for qualifying, and it's the same for the race as well. It's 30 for the win, it's 26, it's 23, and so on. It diminishes thereafter. So Lewis Clark lining up on pole position. Simon Waugh sits alongside. Simon won last time out at Brands Hatch, so that is his only podium finish of the season so far, the top step of the podium. But say he's a man who's been racing Focus Cup since the very beginning of it, way back in 2019, I think was the first season of it, where he finished 8th in the championship in that inaugural year. He was 4th in 2020, he was 12th in 21, did a part season last year and was 13th in the overall standings. Richard Avis is next up. Richard Avis at the wheel of the number 77 car, and he'll be hoping that he might be able to work his way up towards at least clinging on to that podium position. I don't think we've seen Richard out so far this season, but again, another driver that has dabbled his toes in Focus Cup for a season or two, and Ian Mitchell is alongside him. Ian Mitchell, who is lying 2nd in the championship standings, hasn't had a win, but he's had 2nds, he's had 3rds, he's had 4ths. He had a non-finish last time out at Brands Hatch, but he's on 127 points in terms of the championship. So they're just weaving around to try and get a tiny bit more temperature into the Control Nankang tyres that all of the cars run in the Focus Cup. And It will be a standing start for these Focus 3-door 2-litre TDCi engine machines, 135 brake horsepower, but of course it's a diesel engine, so it's all about torque really. So chatting to a few of the drivers, and they say, you know, when they've been racing petrol engine cars where you want to rev the thing, when you start to race the Ford Focus, you do have to reprogram the brain to change gear a lot earlier to keep it in the torque band, because that's where you'll get the power from. So final row of the grid just exiting Murray's, and there are 15 minutes on the clock. And just to give you some colours then, it's sort of silver and blue and light blue for Lewis Clark, who sits there on pole position. Alongside is the green and the orange car, but with the almost RAF-esque roundel down the side of it of Richard Waugh. It's black and red and white for Simon Waugh, rather. It's black and red and white for Richard Avis, alongside the light green car of Ian Mitchell. Abby Walton comes into position at the tail end of the field. We get the green flag waved, and the red lights will come on the gantry in just a few moments' time. 5-second board being held aloft. And then we're about to get round 5 of the 2023 Focus Cup Championship underway here at Snetterton. Red lights on, revs rise, red lights go out. Now it's not a bad start from Lewis Clark from pole position. It's a brilliant start further back down through the order. I think that was Simon Watts who was carving his way through the order. The gap just opened up beautifully for him, and the number 23 car gaining 2 or 3 places down the run in towards Richie's corner. It's a good start also from Greg Saunders, so the two sort of similarly liveried cars also making cracking starts with their orange flashes to them, but Lewis Clark leading the pack as they head up towards the braking area for the hairpin, which is the Wilson hairpin. Simon Waugh brakes a little bit late there, almost allows Richard Avis up the inside. Ian Graham runs a little bit wide coming out of the corner, but everybody's safely through the first few corners, and I think Sarah Hall has dropped to the tail end of the field because Abby Walton has picked up a place. So round through Palmer, side by side for second and third place as Richard Avis tries to brave it out around the outside at Palmer. That was still given the outside line when they get towards Agostini, so Simon Waugh should be positioned appropriately, but there's a little bit of puff of white smoke coming from the front right corner of his car. Has there been a little bit of contact somewhere? I think it's the rear it's actually coming from, so must have been a little bit of contact somewhere on that first lap, and looks as though there is bodywork that is just dragging on the bumper maybe that's touching the tyre. So that's why the white smoke's coming off that car. But for Lewis Clark, the championship leader, and having picked up those maximum points for pole position, he's already heading round through Oggies up towards Williams, and then they'll start to propel themselves down the Bentley Straight for the first time. Really important to get a good run coming out of Williams corner, because you carry all of that momentum all the way down the Bentley Straight. There's Ian Graham. He is looking to try and get right onto the coattails of Simon Walton, who runs this championship, but it is going to be Lewis Clark that leads as they head underneath the vehicle bridge and in towards Brundle and Nelson for the first time. And he's got daylight, hasn't he, between himself and Simon Waugh, up to third place now. We've had a shuffle of the order because it's no longer Richard Avis that's up into third position. And as they start to thread their way out of Brundle and Nelson, round through the daunting right-hander at the bomb hole, it's up towards then the never-ending right-hander at Coram. They're just flashing through shot. That's the number 71 car. That's Claire Avis. Richard Avis having qualified much, much further up the field from the second row of the grid, whereas Claire was on, the 5th row of the grid. So in towards the braking area for Murray's. Jonathan Baker trying to reel in Richard Avis at the wheel of the number 77 car. Richard Avis equally as much as trying to get himself back up onto terms with the car that lies just ahead of him, which is going to be Ian Mitchell that's gone through. Ian Mitchell's car was scheduled to have been a different colour. Looking at it in the paddock yesterday, it was largely going to be a car that was light green with black and red flashes to it, but there's clearly been an issue with that car because he's now at the wheel of a subtly differently liveried one. So he sits there in third position. Richard Avis is there in fourth place. Jonathan Baker is in fifth place. Sixth at the moment, only just, is Greg Saunders, or it was Greg Saunders, because Simon Watts gets a good run coming out of the Wilson hairpin and gains the place on him. And for Greg Saunders, he needs to be careful because he's now got another Simon Walton queuing up behind. So that's a good little fight at the moment that's happening for what is 6th, 7th and 8th places as they pick their way out of Palmer and start to head along the straight that brings them up towards the braking area for the left-hander at Agostini once more. Technical infield section of the Snetterton circuit as they head round through Agostini. Then it's a short straight and up towards Hamilton, which in these cars I would guess is probably as good as flat out. Might be a slight lift. There's certainly no sign of any brake lights as they went in towards Hamilton. Watch that tyre stack on the inside. Don't let the car run wide on the exit of the corner, and then get on the brakes nice and early to get a good exit coming out of this right-hander now, which is Oggy's. Very easy to run wide again on the exit if you don't get the entry point correct. So again, through Williams and onto the Bentley straight. Greg Saunders pushing hard, trying to catch up with the car that he just lost out to, but also conscious that he's got Simon Walton sitting right behind him, looking to try and squeeze his way through. It looks like the lead gap has come down as well, so Lewis Clark, who had got away a little bit from the number 22 car of Simon Waugh, is now being reeled back in once more, so the championship leader feeling the pinch a little bit here from the man who lies third in the championship standings, and one last time out as well did Simon Waugh, looking to try and make it back-to-back wins if he can. Those two have pulled away a little bit more, maybe an extra focus length from Ian Mitchell, who still sits there in what is third position, but of course if these leading pairs start to squabble a bit more, all of a sudden Ian Mitchell will be right there with them. So on to the brakes. This is lap number 2 that's about to be chalked into the book. Lewis Clark leading the way, has yet to win so far this season. So he finished second in the weekend, of course, with 4 races rather than the usual 2. There's a whole fist of championship points up for grabs. And after this weekend, we are then pretty much past the halfway point of the championship season, because there's then only for the 2 races to come at Alton Park up in Cheshire, and then 4 further races to come at Brands Hatch in the middle part of September. Mark McCann looking to try a move here and try and squeeze his way through up the inside going in towards the Wilson hairpin, but it doesn't look as though Ian Graham's going to let that happen on the way into the corner. Gets on the power and is just about to able to keep his nose ahead as they head down towards the left-hander at Palmer. Fastest lap of the race last time through went the way of the car in third place, which was Ian Mitchell. 2 minutes 24.563 from Ian Mitchell. So that should mean he has closed up also onto the leading pair. Up towards the braking area for Agostini. Still the squabble going on. Still as yet, Mark McCann has not been able to work his way through and ahead of the car that lies ahead. That being Ian Graham. Ian Graham equally as much has got Greg Saunders just up the road as well in the orange and white and black machine as they head out of Hamilton and in towards the right-hander at Oggy's. So we're heading towards the halfway point of this race already, so another minute's time we'll be at the halfway point, so they'll probably only get maybe 6 or 7 laps in over the allocated 15 minutes. Now a good exit that time coming out of Williams for Ian Graham, which gets him right into the slipstream of the number 34 car that lies ahead, which is Greg Saunders. The two of them are nose to tail heading down in towards Brundle and Nelson, but he's too far back to try anything as they head in towards the braking area for Brundle and Nelson, so just concentrate on the entry to the corner. Make sure you hit your braking point appropriately. Don't run wide on the exit of it or take too much curb, because you've got the sausage curb on the inside you need to be careful of. And despite the fact that he good exit coming out of Williams, with all of these cars being absolutely identical, there's nothing he could do. He closed up maybe an extra half a car length, that was about all. So good little fight still for what is 7th, 8th and 9th positions, just flicking their way through Corham and in towards the braking area for Murray's, which is where they're coming now. But it's still Greg Saunders from Ian Graham, from Mark McCann. As they get back on the accelerator, you see that telltale puff of particulate smoke out the back. And again, over the start-finish line, another lap chalked into the book. Another lap where this little trio are still trying to work out for the moment who's going to finish 7th, who's going to finish 8th, and who's going to finish in 9th place. So we're at the halfway point of the race now. New fastest lap of the race last time through goes to the race leader. 2 minutes 23.643 that time through for Lewis Clark. That does net him an extra 5 championship points. That's what you get for the fastest lap, so that's where those extra 5 championship points are going currently. We're looking at Simon Walton, who has dropped to the tail end of the field. Now Simon is the man behind the championship. He usually enters the championship each weekend, but he's also conscious that, you know, he is the man behind the championship and therefore can't get embroiled in battles where championship points are up for grabs. So usually he fights for the first few laps and then just drops back and stays out of harm's way. So I think that's probably what he's doing here. Now again, Greg Saunders having to watch his mirrors. Ian Graham sitting right behind. Mark McCann, the third of the 3 cars, looking very, very racy indeed at the wheel of his ABS liveried machine. Good to see that many of the partners of this championship all have cars liveried in their corporate colours. That's the good thing about the Ford Focus Championship, is that everybody that supplies either the control parts or whatever it is, or is involved in some way, shape or form with the championship, usually gets a car liveried in their respective corporate colours. And that's a brilliant little fight still. 7th, 8th, 9th place. Order hasn't shuffled, but they have been absolutely within a whisker of each other. Race leader just heading down towards the bottom of the straight as well. Has the gap come out? Yes, it has. Because of that fastest lap, then it now means that Lewis Clark has opened up the lead advantage between himself and Simon Waugh. It was 1.1 seconds at the start of the lap. Now, through the first two sectors, what's happened? Well, Simon Waugh was quicker through the first sector, but was about a tenth slower through the second. So I think there is a net gain still with Simon Waugh over the race leader on this lap. It really depends as to how quick they are through the final sector. And I think, to be fair, Lewis Clark probably has either more confidence or a better car under him round through that final sector, because it looks as though he has started to pull out an advantage again further over the course of this lap. So through and over the start-finish line, a little more than 5 minutes to go. Lap number 4 about to be completed. Through goes Lewis Clark, and again, new fastest lap of the race that time through for the race leader. 2 minutes 23.483. Simon Waugh still in second. Ian Mitchell in third, but he's having to roll his sleeves up and slug it out a bit now because he's got Richard Davis right behind him. Richard Davis jinking around to try and distract Ian Mitchell, but Ian at the wheel of the Power Max car having none of it. And then there was almost a touch between the pair of them there as they went in towards the Wilson hairpin. Couldn't quite manage to do it though. So they still remain nose to tail through the left-hander at Palmer, with Ian Mitchell clinging on to the place from Richard Davis. So Richard, a man who, I don't think we've seen him out so far this season in the championship, Richard, but he was third last year at Richard Davis. And here at Snetterton picked up a couple of fifth places it was for him last year. Well, he's fourth at the moment. Here's Richard Davis, and looking to see if he can haul himself onto the podium at the expense of Ian Mitchell, but Ian Mitchell won't want that to happen because of course he is second in the championship standings, just 9 points off the race championship leader, which is the race leader, Lewis Clark. So again, out of Oggies, round through the right-hander at Williams. Speed's beginning to build, get a good exit coming out of the corner, be conscious of the circuit limits as well, which have changed recently, the amount of tarmac that you're able to utilise. Motorsport UK introducing some new rules for circuit limits, so the contact patch, which is the tyre, has to stay within the white lines, or where there's a curb, it has to stay on the curb. It can't go even a millimetre beyond, otherwise it's deemed as breaking track limits. So many of the drivers getting used to that and just making sure that they don't overstep the mark, because you can get away with it once, you get a warning if it's the second time. If you do it a third, then the penalties start to rack up, and they do become ever more draconian, the penalties nowadays. So Lewis Clark still leading. Simon Waugh was nearly 2 seconds adrift of him. Then we get this pair fighting over the final podium spot. Ian Mitchell in the number 81 car, with the red and the black car of Richard Davis not too far behind. Then it's Jonathan Baker who sits there in 5th place, and Simon Watts completes the top 6 at the moment. I don't know how the battle for 7th, 8th and 9th is getting on, but that was Greg Saunders, Ian Graham and Mark McCann that were all busy squabbling away, weren't they? And let's have a quick look in the background of the shot. Yeah, I think they're pretty much together still as they come over the start-finish line, but the best of the fights is for the final podium spot at the moment. They'll be heading on to their penultimate lap of the race this time through. So that's 5 laps completed. They're on to lap number 6. We should just squeeze 7 laps out of this one as Richard Davis breaks as late as he can. He's on the outside line going in towards Wilson, so Ian Mitchell just makes sure he parks the car on the apex and gets cleanly off it, and that didn't really give Richard Davis any opportunity there to try and sneak his way through. Can't really drive all the way around the outside at the Wilson hairpin unless the car on the inside line makes a mistake, which Ian Mitchell was never going to do. So again, he's just got to try and work out, is there an opportunity? Is there anywhere where I'm slightly quicker? Jinks out from behind to again show the nose of the car, but he's going to be too far away as they head in towards the braking area for Agostini. So a wide sweep in from Richard Davis to try and get on the power that little bit early and get off the corner quicker. But again, it's only a short straight that brings you up towards the left-hand kink at Hamilton, which is where they're going now. So again, no opportunity. Just a quick flash of the brake lights there, just to scrub off a bit of the speed before you go into what is a fairly quick corner, Hamilton. Had to be conscious of that tyre stack on the inside as well. Take a good chunk of curb, but no more than you're allowed. And make sure, again, coming off this corner, Williams, good exit, don't run wide beyond the curb line, which Richard Davis did there. He was a little bit wide. Curb is the red and white part. Once you head onto the green section, which you did there, then that is running wide. So that may well be one of the free chances that you get with track limits for Richard Avis. It's subject to whether he's done that on previous laps as well. There goes Jonathan Baker through shot. So he did have quite an off yesterday in testing, so Jonathan was originally scheduled to be driving his regular car, which is the blue liveried one. It looks as though he's jumped on board something subtly different this time through. Was it silver with red stripes down the centre, wasn't it? So the car that he crashed yesterday, still in the process of being repaired by the team and may well not be available for him for the rest of the weekend. We'll have to wait and see. So we're into the final 60 seconds or so now. I think we'll get Lewis Clark over the start-finish line before the clock ticks to 0. We've still got squabbles to be settled, and by the look of things, this is Greg Saunders now, who was fighting away with Ian Graham and Mark McCann, remember, the three of them earlier on. Well, all of a sudden now, Greg Saunders has managed to dispense with the two cars behind and has fully caught up with Simon Watts. So Simon Watts, who is lying 5th in the championship standings, took a win on the opening weekend of racing at Donington Park. He's going to have his work cut out here to hang on to 6th position, because Greg Saunders is ever closing at the wheel of the number 34 car. Another new fastest lap of the race last time through. Richard Avis also gets the overlap on Ian Mitchell this time as they head side by side out of the Wilson hairpin, but it's a left-hander at Palmer that's coming up next, which affords Ian Mitchell the inside line, so he should be able to hang on to it. And indeed, has just about kept his nose ahead, but Richard Avis is throwing everything at it, including the kitchen sink, to see whether he can unlock the door to a podium spot here. Be a good result if he can. And again, moving around just to try and do anything. So get Ian Mitchell looking in his mirrors to try and work out where the car behind has gone. And again, he just parks the car at the apex of the corner, is a little bit slower picking up the throttle, and there's nothing Richard Avis can do about that. He might be quicker on the throttle, but Ian Mitchell is just making sure he is holding the racing line. He is probably not driving as quick as he could do, but what he's doing is he's just making sure he gets off the corners quickly. And by doing that, then Richard Avis is always going to struggle to try and pick his way through. So through Williams, onto the Bentley straight for what will be the final time this time through. Richard Avis stays within the confines of the circuit that time, rather than running wide coming out of the corner. But our race leader is Lewis Clark, and he has now opened as a result of another fastest lap of the race last time through with a 2-minute 22.935. He's now opened up a 4.5 second lead between himself and Simon Waugh in second place. Ian Mitchell still there in third place, still with Richard Avis shadowing him. Jonathan Baker's not too far away either, is he, in the silver car with the two red stripes down the bonnet of it. But I think, other than the final podium spot, the first two spots on the podium are largely sorted, because heading out of Murray's for the final time is Lewis Clark, and the championship leader, having extended his championship lead with 30 points for qualifying on pole earlier on, is going to extend it further, because he picks up his first win of the season in round 5 of the 2023 Focus Cup Championship. Lewis Clark lights the flag victory for him. It's going to be Simon Waugh that finishes in second position, so that's good championship points for the man who won the race last time out at Brands Hatch. Ian Mitchell finishes in third place, but shadowed all of the way to the start-finish line by Richard Avis, who finishes in fourth place, and Jonathan Baker was there in fifth. And who's going to finish in sixth place? That was tight as they came over the start-finish line, and by the look of things, it is going to be Mark McCann that finishes in sixth position, Greg Saunders in seventh, and Simon Watts got picked off by a few cars there because he was in sixth. He dropped to eighth place, the number 23 car. Ian Graham comes through in ninth. It'll be Claire Avis in the black and the Dayglow car, I think, that will complete the top 10. Yeah, here she comes over the start-finish line now to finish in 10th position. Sarah Hall, who lives up in Middlesbrough, in the 21 car, should be through to finish in 11th position. She used to be the photographer for the Focus Cup and has now been roped into spending money in racing, but she's thoroughly enjoying it, she was telling me over the course of yesterday. So here comes Sarah now in towards Murray's in the Mintex backed car, so she will finish just outside of the top 10 in 11th position, with Abby Walton, I think, then scheduled to finish in 12th place. And then we just need to usher Andrew Weiss over the start finish line. So there goes Sarah Hall, there goes Abby Walton. Andrew Weiss is as yet to take the checkered flag, but he is in the final sector somewhere and should come through. Here he comes now in the Liquid Moly machine, and 14th is already over the start finish line, because Simon Walton, the man behind the championship, was lapped in the end to see. They just wanted to stay out of trouble and let the customers enjoy themselves. So the final car heading up towards the checkered flag. Lots of particulate smoke coming out of the back of that one does suggest that maybe it might be an injector issue or something like that with Andrew Weiss's car, because that car didn't look to be up to full speed, and there certainly looked to be a lot of black soot around the tail end of his car, so maybe some sort of mechanical issue, or either over fueling or particulates or something like that, an injector that's stuck or something. We'll have to wait and see. But what we can do is confirm the results. The win goes the way of Lewis Clark, his first win of the championship season, with Simon Waugh in second place and Ian Mitchell in third. So the top three in the championship finishing all inside the top three, but not necessarily in championship order. Richard Davis was there in fourth place, ahead of Jonathan Baker in fifth, and Mark McCann was there in sixth position. Then it was going to be the car of Saunders, which is Greg Saunders, who finished in seventh place. Simon Watts lost places, dropped to eighth place in the end, having been sixth at the start of that final lap, so not quite sure what happened with him. Ninth place is going to be Ian Graham, and Claire Avis will complete the top 10. And as we head outside of the top 10, it was Sarah Hall from Abbey Waltham that finished in 12th place. 13th place, the last of the cars that finished on the lead lap, was Andrew Weiss, and Simon Waltham finished a lap adrift. And that's it. That's round 5 of the Focus Cup Championship done and dusted, but we will be back with you for round 6 later on today. That is scheduled to get underway around about 5 to 3 this afternoon. So from everybody here at Snetterton and the Focus Cup Championship, thanks for joining us for round 5. We'll see you later for round 6. Goodbye.